Well, good morning. This is your lucky day. Depending on how you look at life, this could be your unlucky day. Just get ready, okay? Because I'm a little hyped up today. A little extra caffeine. I'm usually not hyped up. I'm usually really calm. I don't know what you're laughing about. That extra hour sleep killed me. Oh, my mercy. You wouldn't think it would. It's just an hour, but man. And then today we have the announcement from our pastor down in the main sanctuary at 10 and about sort of a new vision for where our church is headed. And so there's a lot of folks down there, so be praying for that. But I'm looking forward to being here with you today. And there's something going on in my household that's new to us. My daughter, my baby, was proposed to about 2 weeks ago. And I'm really upset about that. Because this guy she's proposed to is getting his master's degree at Auburn, which is, what is wrong? And he's a great kid. Love this guy. If you're going to handpick somebody for your child, this would be the guy you would pick. And so I'm trying to help them with their wedding preparations as far as what it should look like and what it should be. And so I found some pictures on Google to give them some ideas of what this, he's an Auburn guy, keep that in mind. And this will help them as they prepare for their, and if you're an Auburn fan, no offense, you should be proud of these pictures. So here's one of them. My daughter's not very big, and I think she'll fit in the shovel of the front of and so he could just drive her in. They're doing an outside wedding down in South Alabama about a year or so from now, and that's a good idea. And this is the other one. He's got a dog that looks just like that, and I think the dog should be in the wedding. She's actually smoking a cigarette there. My daughter doesn't smoke, but this was from my big redneck wedding or whatever that show is called. And so I'm just trying to help them out, and she doesn't really appreciate that very much. But I thought that it was a good idea. Let's get that off the screen because that's just distracting. That is just disturbing. And so as they're planning, and of course, once this happens, once the proposal is made and accepted, it consumes the whole family from now until the Lord comes back, I guess, because the whole direction of our family has kind of changed now, and everything's kind of focused. They drove all the way to Tuscaloosa, Zay, not me, yesterday to look at wedding dresses, as though there's not wedding dresses in Huntsville, Alabama. And so everything's just kind of consumed. Honestly, last night as they got back, one of them picked up an iPad, the other a laptop, and they're just looking at wedding stuff. This wedding's a year or so away. I don't understand. We got lots of time, but everything's kind of consumed by this. And so it's got my mind, of course, on this, and really just from a financial perspective, because I keep seeing dollar signs, cha-ching, cha-ching, as this wedding gets bigger and bigger. But I love the image of marriage and the bridegroom and the bride, because it has so much to do with our relationship with Christ. And as I've been thinking about, or forced to think about, this wedding, I have thought about this relationship that we have with Christ and the metaphor that the Bible uses to help us understand that. God uses metaphors in His Word. And metaphors are cool because we sometimes can't wrap our brains around spiritual truths, right? I mean, they're just too deep, and sometimes we just can't connect with what God's trying to say. And so God, in His wisdom, uses metaphors to help us wrap our brains around what He's trying to communicate with us, because more than anything, He wants us to understand His Word. He wants us to understand His desire. And one of the things that He uses in His Word that's just a beautiful example is a marriage. Over and over and over, He uses this metaphor of the bride and the bridegroom are being married to God. In the Old Testament, it was interesting. Isaiah talks about it. Jeremiah talks about it. Hosea, these prophets all talk about God as if the Israelites are married to Him. And He wants to give us this image because when they would worship idols in the Old Testament, false gods, or when they would break God's laws, it was called that you were having an affair on God. That's the image that they use. You were somehow cheating on God, and the language they used was an affair. You're committing spiritual adultery is what they called it. Isn't that amazing? We can wrap our brains around that. We understand that image because the Israelites have this relationship with God, and yet they're cheating on God by worshiping false gods or not obeying His laws. And so we can understand that. And in the New Testament, it talks about Christ being the bridegroom and his church, those who follow him, being the bride. And so we get that, right? And that's easy for us to understand, especially in my household right now. But it's a different perspective in the New Testament. Because the bridegroom, it's like we're engaged to Jesus, but we're not yet married to Jesus. And that can be a little confusing, especially in a culture that doesn't really value the sanctity of engagements these days. You can be engaged and you can break it off. And so it's as though we're connected with Christ. He's our bridegroom, but he hasn't came yet for us. That's still out there. Let me show you in John just a few verses that give us some of this image. And this is not on the slide, Barry. I'm sorry. I just actually came to my mind this morning, which is amazing. John chapter 3, and it's in verse 25. And this is John the Baptist that's talking here, John the Baptizer. And he said, Jesus has came and he's brought his disciples, and they've kind of linked up with John and his disciples. And they've had this time together of serving, and now Jesus and his disciples go to somewhere else, and John's disciples are a little disturbed. And so they come to him and they say, there was this discussion between some of John's disciples and a Jew over purification. And they came to John and they said to him, Rabbi, he who was with you across the Jordan, speaking of Jesus, to whom you bore witness, look, he is baptizing, and all are going to him instead of you, John. And John answered, a person cannot receive even one thing unless it is given him from heaven. You yourselves bear witness that I said, I am not the Christ, but I have been sent before him. Now listen to this. But the one who has the bride, speaking of those who follow Jesus, the one who has the bride is the bridegroom. The friend of the bridegroom who stands and hears him rejoices greatly at the bridegroom's voice. Therefore, this joy of mine is now complete. He must increase, and I must now decrease. And so John gives us this image of the bridegroom and the bride. Is that when we follow Jesus Christ, when we make the decision to follow Christ, we are now, as the church, called the bride of Christ. Isn't that amazing? And Jesus is the bridegroom. And it's like, before we accept Christ, it's like this proposal's there. And that Jesus proposes to mankind through his life. And that he waits for our response. Not too long ago, about 2 months ago, this boy calls me up and he's in town. And he says, let's go have some breakfast at this heavenly place called Bojangles. Oh my goodness. Fried manna. All right. It's fried chicken. I have to really watch it. I got what they call a weight issue. And so I have to really watch the fried food. And so we go to Bojangles, this heavenly restaurant, and I noticed that he's distracted about something. It was pretty obvious. He was nervous. So we're going through the line, and I knew he was distracted because he paid for my food. So I knew something was going on. He's a college kid. And then we take our food and we sit down, and I know that something's up. And he's nervous, and he's never nervous around me. His name is Winston Crowder. His middle name is Augustus. What a creeper. And so we sit down, and he said he's not eating this food, this manna in front of him. And so I know something's wrong because the kid can eat, and he just won't even look at me. And I said, Winston, what's going on? He said, I really need to talk to you about something. And I didn't know what he was going to tell me at that point because I had no clue. And he said, I want to talk to you about your daughter. Now, this could go one or two ways. And I was hoping it didn't go the other way. Praise God, it didn't. And he couldn't even form the words. He's emotional, and he's trying to ask me for my daughter's hand in marriage. And I knew where it was going, and so I messed with him. I just kept talking about my fried stuff in front of me. He's like, I'm trying to tell you that I want to ask your daughter to marry me. And of course, I was excited about that. And it was in that moment that it occurred to me that he chose her. That's the one he chose. Isn't that a beautiful thing? That of all the girls in the world, and many that are down on the plains at Auburn, he chose a girl that went to Alabama. What is that about? This is the person that he is saying that he loves more, and he told me that. He said, I love her more. These are not words fathers want to hear, really. I love her more than anybody. I can't see myself, these are the words he used, I can't see myself with anybody else, ever. And of course,